We're live.
All right. Thank you, Denise. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate everyone dialing back in. Just shows how important this information is that we're looking to distribute today. So I apologize for the previous happenings a little earlier in our presentation, in our webinar. We take precautions, and unfortunately, we had a couple pranksters get on and say some not kind things. So we appreciate everyone taking some time with us to regroup. We've got a couple volunteers here. We're working to get this information out to our community. This is very important. So we appreciate everyone who is able and willing to hop back on. For those of you who are not able to get on because of any waiting room or password protection that we have on the meeting now, please know that this is being broadcast live on Channel 9. It's on YouTube and our live stream. It's also being recorded so that it will be viewable at a later date. So if if you're listening today and you'd like to rewatch, or if you do know of a business who wasn't able to watch or isn't able to get in, this will be available to them on demand on our website at hammonton.com. So we'll since we're starting a little late, we'll look to get right into it. So I know I've introduced myself and my co-chair, Rich Raymond of the Economic Impact Committee. And today we have a few individuals who are going to be bringing some really good information forward today. So what you touched on before was that the PPP program is now rolling out a second round. And additionally, the financial landscape around the coronavirus pandemic is starting to change again. There are other grant opportunities. There's some other loan type initiatives that are out there. And we want to make sure we get that information out to everybody as soon as we can. So our last webinar was actually in October, and we're excited to have our new webinar out today. So I'd like to recognize two of the individuals who are going to be helping us today. Mr. Jim Donio. Jim is our town advocate for the Hammonton, and he is also the co-chair of the Hammonton Coronavirus Task Force. We also have Mr. Ryan DeBoda. Ryan is an advisor at Ryan is an advisor at No Boundary Advisors, and he is also the vice president of Hammonton's Main Street organization. So Ryan and Jim, I'd like to thank you for taking the time today to share some information with the town. Additionally, we have Copilia Morales. She is going to be providing Spanish translation. So if you have any questions and need Spanish translation, she will be able to provide that to businesses in the chat. Just to let everybody know that even though this webinar is being recorded, the responses to questions that are either put in the chat or we answer today will be translated and will be put on the website in both English and in Spanish. So just with typical Zoom etiquette, since we didn't have that earlier in the program, so I'll review that real quick with everyone. The only videos you should see today should be those who are presenting. So kindly like to ask everyone to please turn off your microphone and your video during the presentation. If you do have a question and you'd like to ask, in the chat button at the very bottom of your screen where it says share screen that's highlighted in green, directly to the left of that is a chat button. If in that chat you'd like to place any questions you have, I'll make sure we get through the questions for those who have them today in the webinar. We also have a list of questions that came in from help@hammonton.com via email, or you can always call our hotline at 609-925-1166. So we have a list of questions that have actually come in during the course of the week, and we'll work to answer them today as well. If we don't get to them all, we will make sure that we get to them all and they're answered in paper form on the website at hammonton.com. So I think it's good to get started. So I'd like to start off, Ryan, I'd like to kind of kick it to you first, if you're able to kind of help. PPP has kind of been a hot thing, right? With coming out with round 2. So I was hoping, it's been a little while. Can you just review a little bit about what the payroll protection program is and who may be eligible for this upcoming round 2?
Absolutely, Jonathan. I'm more than happy to go through this and would like to re-emphasize to everybody on this call, if you have any questions at all, please not hesitate to put them into that chat box and we'll work to address them as they come in. Now let's talk about the PPP program for 1 second. Many people are familiar with this program who've been following along with our task force. There may be some this could be a new endeavor for. So the PPP, Paycheck Protection Program, is a program that was authorized last spring during the height of the current pandemic to basically provide payroll assistance to small businesses in an effort to keep their staff, keep their team members employed, even though businesses may be experiencing a reduced volume. This program ran until the end of July of 2020, and coming into the end of 2020, early 2021, Congress reauthorized this program in two forms. So first things first, Jonathan, because I know you mentioned about a second round, but I would like to mention that if you did not apply for a PPP loan, and it is technically a loan, but we'll get into the grant portion in a bit. If you did not apply for a PPP loan the first time, they actually have reopened the program to first-time users. So I do know that there were some small to mid-sized business owners that did not apply for PPP during the first go around, and that opportunity is open to you as of today. Second, there is a second draw, a second chance at getting an additional PPP loan if you did not get the first one, or I'm sorry, if you did get the first one and have already utilized those funds, provided that you meet certain criteria. So it's a little bit of a taller hurdle to be cleared in order to get a second PPP loan, but that was the intention for the business owners that needed the funds the most to help sustain their operations. So with that being said, I'm going to just give a couple of quick highlights for what it means to be able to get a second PPP loan, and then we'll see if anyone has any questions from there. So the main crux of being able to get a second PPP loan is, number one, you had to have gotten your first draw loan. So if you did not get a first draw PPP loan, automatically you're not eligible for number two at this time, and we would go back to number one. If you did get a first round PPP loan, you need to have used those funds that you were given for qualifying expenses. And qualifying expenses include payroll, rent, utilities, personal protective equipment, PPE equipment for your staff, or mortgage interest if you own the real estate that your business operates out of. So you had to have used those funds already, which, given the fact that nobody should have gotten PPP funds after July, most anyone who did already have a PPP loan should have used that money up by now. The second component of it is that you need to demonstrate a drop in revenue exceeding 25% in any given quarter. So what this means is if you were to take any calendar quarter, so January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December, and compare your total sales from 2019 to 2020, if your total sales in 2020 were 75% or less, you would qualify for a second PPP loan, and therefore you'd be able to get that funding again and have it forgiven. Another important note that I would like to point out for the purposes of our viewership is, the pandemic, as I think we've observed as time has passed, has certainly hit some industries much harder than others, in particular our friends in the hospitality businesses, hotels, cafes, bars. If you are in certain business classes with the NICS code, and I believe that starts with a 72, I'm just looking at my background screen here to confirm that, you are actually eligible for more PPP funds than you were allowed to use in the first go around. So the program, just so people are aware, basically the government was going to provide you up to 2.5 months of your monthly payroll with some stipulations. For the restaurant industry, for the second round PP2, you can actually claim up to 3.5 months of money. So it's a pretty substantial expansion that's available. And there is not there's really not a reason not to do this, because ultimately speaking, this loan is forgivable. And that's a very important thing to note, is that, provided the money is used properly, it would be, it would be converted over to a forgiven loan, and therefore eligible to, fund your business and not need to be repaid. So pretty substantial. Jim, do you have anything you want to add to kind of the brief overview?
No, I think you gave a great recap, and I don't have anything specifically to add to that. I think the overview is excellent. I did also just want to jump in, just because we did have those issues with people trying to jump onto the call. So to kind of filter that through a little bit, since everyone can't get on the call, and some people I know are watching on Channel 9 and have questions, or online and aren't on the Zoom, they can text me just for this call. And even if this is rebroadcasting, text me at 609-742-1333. Text directly to me any questions you have specifically as we get further along. We're going to go over some basic stuff, Ryan and I and others, and then you could text though with any questions you have. All right, this way then we're not feeling like we're boxing anybody out. And again, if need be, there are translations available. We can pass that along to make sure that we get that translated if need be.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jim, and thank you, Ryan, for the overview. So, are you able to just go into the differences between the first draw and the second draw? Is it just specifically the criteria that a business needs to meet, or is the second draw? Are you able to spend that money on different things, different qualifying expenses than you were on your original first draw?
That's an excellent question. So to try to go back into history a little bit without potentially confusing anybody on the call, this program has been a moving target, and hence why during the course of 2020, we did several of these webinars, because the rules were written, then they were changed and rewritten and changed again. So the most recent rule set for how PPP funds are to be utilized, and this has been set now for several months, is you are eligible, you in order for your loan to be forgiven, and let's just talk, because I think that's a really important thing, is people want to get this money and then not have to worry about paying it back. 60% of those funds at least have to be used on qualifying payroll, and that's a very important thing. So hypothetically speaking, if a business owner got a PPP loan in the event or in the amount, rather, of say $100,000, just to use a nice round number, a minimum of $60,000 would have to be used for payroll, and then the remaining 40 could still be used for payroll, but then there's another bucket of items that money can be used for. It can be used for rent, it can be used for the business's utilities, it can be used for mortgage interest if the business is not renting a space, but rather owns the space and is paying back a loan on it. And it can also be used for protective equipment. So those rules have been set in place now for several months. Now, here's something that's also interesting, right? So depending on the size of the actual loan that you're going to be going in for, the rules do change a little bit. So if you're going in for a PPP loan of less than $150,000, which is, quite frankly, encompasses the vast majority of these PPP loans, 150,000 or less, the process becomes dramatically simplified, because while we want to make sure we use those items correctly, you are not required to prove out that you use those. There's not a submission that proves out that you use the funds in that way. So when Congress passed this most recent act, they wanted to simplify this and really help small mom and pop business owners. So while it's very important that you do track these items, in the rare event that you are audited by the Treasury Department, you want to be able to say, look, I got the money, here's what I used it for. However, though, when you go in to apply for that loan and or apply for the forgiveness of that loan, if it's $150,000 or less, you do not have to actually provide the documentation behind it. You need to merely sign a certification saying, yes, I received this money, I used it in this appropriate fashion. So beyond that, there is not too much that really changed with this. Now, one thing I think I would like to cover, it's an area that I know I've received some questions from area businesses. So if a couple people are asking this question, I'm sure it's on the mind of others. How do I know if my sales drop 25%? How do I, check and see if I qualify for this? And there's a couple of ways to do this. Number one would be if you're a retail business, just to compare your sales tickets year over year. So if you have the ability to pull a report in your accounting system, I know a lot of small business owners utilize a program like QuickBooks. It would just be a matter of comparing your revenue in that 3-month period from 2020 to 2019. If you do not use QuickBooks or have an accounting software, an easy way of looking this up, then what you're actually able to do is if you can get copies of your business bank statement, and if you tally up your deposits for those 3 months and compare to the prior year, and if they're off by at least 25%, you qualify, you're good to go ahead and apply.
Yeah, so to pick up on that, Ryan, and I thought that was a good way to capture it. So I think it's just, again, important just to clarify, because we're used to dealing with it, but like unlike what happened in the past, right? So round one, if you already got round one of PPP last year, right, and you already had no issues with it and so on, that's great. Now you're available for this availability in this year, but you're only available if you lost, right, had a decline in revenue of 25% or more in any one, we'll call it a quarter for lack of a better terminology, right? But any one period. They are doing it based on true quarters though, correct, Ryan? Or is it a sliding period?
That is correct. So it is
Right,
based on a true calendar quarter. So you can't cherry pick. Yeah, you can't cherry pick any 3-month or 90-day period.
And that's the way I've been explaining it to people too. But again, to clarify, so for example, if a lot of businesses were shut down in 2020, so let's say it was a little retail clothing store, or it was a little restaurant, and they were shut down in April, May, and June, or for good portions of that. Well, there's a very, very, very high likelihood that you've lost 25% or more of your revenue, right, during that period. So from 2020, any quarterly period in 2020 versus from the second quarter of 2020 though, correct though, Ryan? Second quarter of 2020 through the end of 2020, any quarterly period where you had received a 25% or more decrease in revenue.
Correct,
yeah. So that's just important to clarify. That's versus 2020 versus 2019. So again, maybe you brought in $50,000 in the second quarter of 2019 and maybe 10,000 in 2020, you're easily eligible. You don't have to get worried if you're very eligible and it's obvious, because that's going to be very clear and easy to define. So you're going to know it's worth you taking the next step and really capturing that data. If you're like, you can kind of see you're almost even in every quarter, well, then it probably really isn't worth you going through the next steps at that point. So that's just important to kind of clear out anybody that would not be eligible right out of the gate. I hope that makes sense to everybody, but we're certainly happy to help calculate. And I saw that Rick Seppi offered and said he would be happy to help calculate as well, any kind of revenues. Certainly we can we're happy to help at the hotline, at the task force hotline you can email help@hammonton.com, or you can call us at 925-1166, 609-925-1166.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. And Ryan, you've mentioned forgiveness a couple times for PPP1. You do not need to be forgiven of your PPP round 1 loan to apply for round 2. Is that correct?
That is entirely correct. So that has been a popular question. Do I need to have my first loan forgiven prior to applying for the second one? You do not need to have that first loan forgiven prior to the second one. One thing I will mention, and this is more in particular for people that have a first round PPP loan of over $75,000, very key number. So if your PPP loan is below $75,000, this information generally would not apply to you. But if it's over $75,000, I would recommend consulting with your CPA as to the timing of when to apply for this PPP loan. One thing that the government did do is they kind of simplified the process for applying for forgiveness, right? So if you have a PPP loan of under $150,000, when you apply for forgiveness, it's a very simple form that basically is you as the business owner attesting or signing off on the fact that I used the money as I said I was going to. Now, if your first loan was not forgiven yet, the combined amount of your first and second loan is now the new bucket that you fall into. So if you had a $75,000 PPP loan on the first go around and you got another $75,000 on the second round, when you apply for forgiveness, you are now subject to the rules of someone that has a $150,000 PPP loan. It's not that dramatic of a difference in applying for forgiveness. There's a couple of extra steps and numbers that need to be pulled together, but I do like to point that out for people, just knowing that, hey, it might create a little bit of extra work. So that's a discussion for you to have with any advisor. More than happy to kind of help people and answer those questions via the helpline, but just something I'd like to point out that you might want to consider.
So maybe we should walk through, that's helpful, Ryan, thank you. Maybe we should walk through just to kind of clear up the next steps in PPP, this next round of PPP, because I think that's where the most pressing interest in and everybody is. It's a shot in the arm for another round of funding for them to get immediately. We want to make sure we clarify the forgiveness piece for the first round and the second round, right? But we definitely want to make sure that they get in the pipeline, since there's no downside. As Ryan mentioned, there's no downside. You don't need to, you're not required, nor will you be penalized for applying for and receiving round two, even if you haven't gotten through your entire forgiveness of round one, as long as you've expended it, which for most businesses, that shouldn't be an issue, because again, it wasn't like it was an incredible amount of money in a short, to expend over a fairly extensive period of time. So that should apply for most businesses, but make sure you expended all your, which again, by this point, I'm sure you have your 2020 funds, and then you could start the application process. You can use the same banking relationship you had with the first round. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, and might be easier, harder, really hard to say. That's personal choice. You can use a different banking relationship. You don't have to use a traditional lender. You can use those non-traditional lenders that are out there, as long as they're reputable and verified. Those would be perfectly acceptable too. But it's important to be aware that, again, you do not apply directly to the SBA. It does not apply directly to the Small Business Administration. We like to clarify that because, again, we're immersed in it. So we're just, a lot of times we kind of assume like everybody knows all the ins and outs. So the EIDL, the SBA EIDL grant or loan, or both, the advance or loan, were directly through SBA. We're going to be touching on that at the very end, and then we're probably going to do another follow-up on that at some point. But for PPP, that goes directly through your bank, or any bank, really, quite frankly, that'll allow you. And just also keep in mind that your bank last year at some point might have outsourced the processing and servicing of this because it got overwhelming for them. I know I could speak to Ocean First and several other banks and lenders that have done that, because it's just too much paperwork. So be aware, and that's where it gets extra tricky, because it's like, is this real? Am I getting spammed, or is this real, viable, verified information from my bank or an associated entity of my bank? Just be careful. If you have a banking relationship, call them. If you go to a bank branch here in town, print out the email and show it to them and say, is this real? Because the last thing you want to do is have someone con you out of your money or get access to your information, right? So it is a little scary. We're happy to help along the way too, if you'd like. Those would be little things that I would just kind of remind everybody to be aware of. Mm-hmm.
And to build on that, and I'm in the process of sending this over to be posted on the Hammonton Coronavirus Task Force webpage. The SBA that is administering the program on behalf of the federal government actually has a neat little website to show you who verified lenders are to administer the program. That is at sba.gov/funding program/loans/lender match. So this will be posted up on the coronavirus resource page. So if you have any concerns at all and you want to make sure that the emails you're getting are coming from the verified lender, you can research it that way as well.
Okay.
Fantastic. And just to give everybody some information, a little bit additional information, the deadline to apply for your PPP loan round 2 is March 31st, 2021. Is that correct, Ryan?
That is correct. There is also a limited amount of funds that have been allocated to this. So Congress had allocated just south of $300 billion in the second draw PPP program. Currently, a third of that money has been allocated thus far. The program has been open for a few weeks. So there is a limited pool of money. While there's a lot of talk that they will not run out of money for those who were joining us in earlier episodes of this webcast, the first round back in April did in fact expire very quickly. So
yes, the only and again, the only difference is, so to Ryan's point, it absolutely is finite, but there is a likelihood. So basically, get it in, start the process now. Sooner the better is, I think, the point Ryan's trying to make. I agree with it completely. Sooner the better. That doesn't mean be panicked about it, but over the next couple days, just start to gather your information, get it all together, and reach out to your bank and start that process. The first step being very easy, which is go through, as Ryan mentioned, either your QuickBooks or your own internal accounting, hand accounting that you have in sales revenues, 2020 versus 2019 for a quarter, or go through your bank statements and just get a gauge of deposits one year versus the other as well. And again, we're happy to help with that. The point is, though, that yes, it's fairly likely, because it's not for every business this time around, or nearly every business like it was the first time, that it should go a little further or a lot further. And also that there's a likelihood that it's one of the few things maybe Congress can all agree to, that everyone kind of agrees that PPP is certainly a positive, right? Especially if it's targeted to the businesses that have been affected the most. So if there are businesses, as we get closer, don't just assume I missed my deadline, but get it in now in February sooner than later, just to be safe and make sure you don't run out. All right. There's a question from Tony Lynn, and that's about, is there a form to fill out for forgiveness? Yes. Follow through with your bank, your lender, whoever round 1 was applied through. So if it was whoever it may be, BB&T or Ocean First or TD Bank, whoever it was, or some other non-traditional lender or community bank, then reach out to them. They will have a process. They may still tell you they're on pause, because some actually, hard to believe, but some are actually still kind of frozen out, even though we're getting to that 10-month period for a few folks. They may tell you that. If your lender tells you that, you have to trust, we all have to trust that they're telling you the truth, and that they will not freeze you out from getting forgiveness. I have heard of some folks who've run into that situation. Ryan, I don't know if you have as well, though.
We absolutely have. There are some banks that are not currently accepting forgiveness applications. Actually, just prior to this webinar, I just received some information that part of the reason why there's been a bit of a slowdown, I'll say, in processing forgiveness applications is because with the ramp up of the second round of PPP loans, the people at the SBA that process all this information have basically pressed pause on the forgiveness to focus on getting money into the hands of businesses, as Jim mentioned, is kind of the priority to help those that are struggling the most. So as Jim mentioned, you go through your current bank. It might not be open at this point in time. But, just kind of ask for some patience in working through the program. But there is an application.
And in fairness to the lenders and even SBA, right? It's an overwhelming process, the whole thing, back in the spring when they did it, ever since then, and even this round, right? Because it was kind of launched officially all through, right at the end of the year at Christmas, kind of ramrodded through, and now it was kind of like the rush started, like, hey, and you have to be able to start accepting applications very quickly. And so it's still going to be a little bumpy, but not nearly as bumpy as it was last time, right? Because we're all a little bit more familiar. And again, we're here to help. That's why we're here. So 609-925-1166. 625-925-1166 if you have it. Why do I always forget the number?
It's okay. It's a tough one.
No, it is. Yeah. And help@hammonton.com. So feel free to reach out. If you're watching this live or recorded, feel free to reach out anytime, or not just with questions about PPP or EIDL or other grants, local grants or other things, or tax questions. We're not tax attorneys, but what we could do is help connect you with people who could kind of help and point you to good info that's online if we don't have it ourselves, and we're happy to help with that.
Yeah, Jim, that's a great topic. Today, what we're giving you is not exhaustive, most certainly not. And our goal is to arm you with enough information to, help you get on your way. If, as you start going through this process, you have additional questions, reach out to us. If we don't have the information, we're going to get you in contact with somebody to get it, or we're going to find that information for you. So if you don't hear what you need to hear today, please reach back out to us. Let us know. We'll make sure you get the info. Before we switch gears off PPP into either EIDL or some other business grants, I just wanted to hit on forgiveness one more time and also throw it out there. If anyone has any questions on PPP before we pivot to other grants, please feel free to throw them in the chat, if you have them. So for loan forgiveness, is there a timeline in which a business needs to apply for forgiveness within the maturity date of their ultimate loan?
There is. There is and there isn't, right? So technically speaking, the repayment terms, I believe, start after 10 months from when the loan was actually received. However, though, the window to apply for forgiveness is a bit longer than that. So really, it's kind of a timing issue, for lack of better words. There's a lot of people who want to apply for forgiveness before the servicing on that loan actually starts. But I believe the terms are, and it's been a while since I've looked at this, I think you have actually up to the 2 years to apply for the forgiveness of the entire loan. But like I said, it's one of those things where you want to do it the sooner the better. One thing I would like to note, I don't think we've hit on this as an organization. There was a lot of talk as to whether or not the loan, when it is forgiven, is going to be considered taxable. That was a concern on quite a few people. It did come out and it was clarified that the loan, once it is forgiven, is not considered taxable. So it is considered basically the equivalent of tax-free income at the time of forgiveness. Very positive thing to a lot of small business owners that needed the help. And there'd be a conversation with your CPA when you're getting ready to file your taxes for this year to make sure that that is documented and handled in an appropriate way. And if for some reason you have a concern that it's not handled in an appropriate way, the best advice we could give is don't be afraid to seek out a second opinion from somebody. Look, this is as Jonathan and Jim mentioned, a lot of this stuff is new. It's occurring during an unprecedented time, a very stressful time for a lot of people. So it never hurts to have a second set of eyes on something if you think something isn't exactly lining up with how you think it should look. So would go ahead and emphasize that.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I'm not just messaging or on Facebook. I'm actually getting texts from people. So I have a couple questions here from people, if that's okay, that aren't able to log in at the moment or are watching on TV. So do you mind if, Jonathan, is that okay if I hit a couple of those? Or
Absolutely. We've answered quite a few questions actually that have already come in from help@hammonton.com. So Jim, if you'd like to make sure we get through some of the questions you're getting asked, that would be great.
Okay, sorry about that. And yes, so one of the questions was as it relates to, I'm going to paraphrase just a bit, but it's as it relates to the tax consequence, which Ryan just answered. So that was good. We could clear that one out. But again, that is a difference from what originally was discussed because it was considered taxable income. So that's very important. I think the other question that I know Ryan wanted to touch on, and I believe you did as well, but also somebody messaged in about, and that was the $10,000 or the EIDL advance, and whether or not now we still have to be concerned about that being deducted from the PPP loan for round one, for phase one, or not. I mean, I know the answer. I guess, should I answer my own question for somebody that just messaged in? Or
I think you
absolutely can.
Okay, it's slightly weird, but we'll do it. So up until the new relief package was passed in late December, it was we had warned everyone and cautioned everyone that be aware, you were going to have any grant you received or advance money you received from EIDL directly from the federal government through SBA was going to be deducted from your loan forgiveness. So you wouldn't be able to, it would basically be still considered a loan. Unfortunately, it was like a double-edged sword. You were happy you got this grant or this advance from SBA, but then you were kind of disappointed as a business owner saying, well, now if I got 10,000 or 2,000 or whatever it was, I would now have to deduct it. And so I would still have to pay some of it back from my PPP. That's no longer the case. As long as you've followed along with your PPP guidelines and you're following all those regulations for forgiveness, then they will not ding you or zing you, however you want to look at it, or penalize you or your business for receiving that advance or that grant, which was a positive thing too, and the right thing to do. So we were happy that the federal government did that. So what does that mean? All that means is everything that we told you back, up till and including last October, you had to unlearn. And even today, the conversations we're having today, I know we used to say it all through last year. Be aware, number one, apply for everything you can apply for, right? If you're legally eligible for it. Number two, always be aware that each day, unfortunately, they're going to keep tweaking the interpretations, the regulations, and they may even pass, as they're about to, I think it looks like shortly over the next couple of weeks, a whole new round of funding as well. So just be aware the rules will change along the way. This is the information we have today, but certainly that deduction now is eligible. So you are now, if you received EIDL grant or advance, you don't have to worry about paying that back. You do have to still worry though, if you did receive what's called the EIDL from the SBA loan, right? Right now it's on deferment for pretty much everybody, I would say. Yeah, pretty much for everybody. So if you received that, and it ranged, some people got as much as, businesses got as much as $150,000. That was another question that people had was, that's still a loan. That has not been forgiven by Congress yet. So, and we're not sure that it ever will be. So just assume that that's going to be a loan. It's a relatively low interest and it's a 30-year repayment with a year deferment. So it's still a good thing. And you can still apply for that if you didn't and you hesitated early on. If you're careful with your money, that's good. That's good debt to have. Like that's, if there's good debt of any type, that's the type of good debt to have. If you can put it to use for your business, to not just keep it in business, but also to help grow it during this challenging time. And we could get into that, and we'll get into that probably after this in another session. But EIDL and PPP work in concert, and they work well together if you're using them effectively. So those are kind of a couple little things on EIDL advance and so on. I know that gets a little muddy, but again, we're happy to answer any questions in that regard. And your accountants should know all this, but it is changing regularly and does get a little bit tricky. So Ryan, do you want to touch on the issue with or do you want to hit that at the very end? Maybe those couple items I know you wanted to hit with the tax credit and the employee tax credit and retention tax credit and the other thing. You want to hit that at the very end?
I would say those couple of things we should hit at the very end because they're a little more higher level.
Okay, so, Jonathan, what else you have?
I just had one thing from Jim from what you said. I want to make sure I understood it correctly. The EIDL advance that was forgivable. The EIDL loan that was not forgivable. Advance funds have been fully allocated and they're not currently available at this time. Is that correct?
No.
That is.
No, advance funds, they re-upped again. That was part of yeah. They re-allowed it for certain people. For example, if you received a $2,000, Ryan, check me on that, but the information, the most recent update I saw was that if you received, for example, if you received a $2,000 advance, you're now eligible to try to go for the full 10,000. That's the way I interpreted it. Am I not interpreting it right, Ryan? You want to double check that for me on the fly?
That would be the. Yeah, I'm gonna work on that one. So if you have something you want to talk about,
okay, yeah, we'll keep going. So again, they are like all this guidance. Like there's a whole layer of guidance that gets issued and released. That's the way I interpreted it. I could be wrong, so we're gonna have Ryan check me on that because I don't want to give you bad information. Obviously, that's the last thing we want to do. But Ryan, I think if you check that,
we're both correct.
Yeah, because
it's a very limited advance that's available. So whereas so I'll try to keep a bit of a history lesson here brief. There was so first off, for the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, which was the first program that came out to really try to help get some relief to business owners. You were eligible for an advance on that potential loan of up to $10,000 that was considered forgiven, and without getting into the details of the PPP. So those advances have since been closed. However, there is a very narrow window where you could, if you did not get an advance yet, you could get the $10,000 advance and or have your advance increased. Number one is being located in what is being referred to as a low-income community as determined by the SBA, and that information is on the SBA COVID-19 Economic Injury Disaster Loan website. The other one would be if you can demonstrate a 30% reduction in your sales, during an 8-week period beginning on March 2nd of 2020. So I learned something new today, and I'm one of the presenters. This is great. But
but there's a good life lesson though, and that's why, Ryan, I wasn't trying to. I apologize. You generally know about roughly twice what I know on this stuff because you're immersed in it every day. But there's an example where again, even us where we're immersed in it, it's hard to keep track of this stuff, which is why we're always telling people we're going to do a follow-up to this one. And again, we know we're covering a lot of ground here, but again, that's why we're here to talk it out. It also sharpens our skills along the way as they release new info. Ryan, to that point though, and this is actually something that I think we should do, just because we should probably do maybe a whole EIDL one, because there's some dollars out there for Hammonton businesses in addition to the PPP, and we want to make sure we capture as much of them as we can. Maybe it's not as big a bucket of funds, but again, it's another few thousand that maybe otherwise we might not be able to help you capture any other way. So Ryan, if you can, not for today, but if we could just make a note for ourselves, and Jonathan, can we just make sure that we nail down the exact we know the parameters, but the exact whether that, for example, it was like if you had 2 employees, right, you got $2,000, but if you were in the early round last year, you got 10,000. Then they changed it because they were worried they were going to run out of money, and then you got scaled back and skinned down to 2,000. The way I interpret it was, if you got that 2,000, 1,000 per employee, or 1,000 depending on how many employees, and they could give you up to 10,000, you can now reapply for that up to 10,000 if you're in an economically disadvantaged area, or you've been received a decline of more than 30%, which again, for a lot of folks, that's going to be the case. That 8-week period back in March, through June or so was definitely should have been less, down 30% for a lot of businesses that were affected. Is that correct, Ryan?
That would be correct. And actually, I just saw a question come through about where's the information applying for this, and this is actually so new that the SBA hasn't even laid out what qualifies as a low-income community. So this looks like something that is about as new gets. They're still writing the rules on it. Also interesting here, it says the SBA is going to be contacting you if you qualify, which we'll see how that goes.
Well, but that's to be proactive about it. SBA.gov is will have the most current information. That being said, as Ryan said, it is fresh and new as far as what they're posting, and it's not completely updated because I'm sure they haven't worked out the mechanics versus everything else they're trying to get done. But be aware that could end up being a little bucket of funds for you as well. So leave a note for yourselves, and we will absolutely do a follow-up workshop, probably one of our next ones on that. As far as that goes, keep in mind, again, that is a grant. I mean, they call it an advance. It's a grant. I mean, there's no gray area about it. That bucket of funds would be a grant, so be very aware of that. And the other thing as related to the SBA would be just to be mindful that we may, and I haven't checked this yet, depending on our census tract. So each area of town has a slightly different, if you could kind of think about, like, they consider each area of town, according to the US government, a different census tract. So a different census area, basically. Quite a few, believe it or not, and we'll say we're fortunate in that it might make you eligible for some grants as a business owner, but unfortunate because that means a lot of folks in the census tracts are living at or below the poverty line, unfortunately. And in New Jersey, the cost of living here is quite high, so they do factor that in. But be aware, we'll monitor that. We'll try and get a snapshot if it's the entire town, if it's sections of the town and where the businesses are, or if it's the entire zip code. We will find that out and gather that information as soon as the SBA updates us. Okay. So
fantastic.
This was educational for us along the way.
What was that, Jim?
I said this was educational for us along the way and gave us our next workshop session. So that's good to know.
Exactly. And there's, we've always said it a lot, that there's so much that's out there and things are changing daily, that we're trying to always make sure that we stay ahead of it. So we're continuing to learn a few things here. So we won't go too much into EIDL since we're likely going to do another webinar that just kind of immerses ourselves in that. As Jim had said, there is some dollars there for Hammonton businesses. Want to make sure we get them out to others as well. Jim, in terms of, I'm sorry, do you have something, Mike?
No, I was just going to say, maybe we should just, again, I don't want to veer off here, but
2-minute recap on it.
Yeah,
well,
I was going to say
a little recap. Yeah, because it is a lot, but also just, again, to clarify the types of things. So Ryan talked about obviously anything payroll related, including, help me out, but like retirement benefits and so on, like, right? Is
correct.
I believe in this is qualified, correct, for the most part?
Yeah,
bonuses. bonuses to a degree, as long as they're not too way out of whack, hazard pay, that's all considered payroll. So again, monitor that with your CPA and your accountant, but just don't think payroll is just as quite as black and white as, just gross wages. There's a little jiggle room in there. So be aware of that and look at, if you just Google even or go onto the SBA site, but just Google PPP uses, right? Verified uses. It comes up pretty easily there. But what Ryan had mentioned earlier is the uses, right? So 60%, he said, is the minimum requirement to earmark toward your payroll, right? That's good and that's important, but I think we should touch on at some point before we wrap self-employed independent business owners, right? Because you can't just give yourself big salaries because they don't want that. But as an independent business owner or an owner operator type person, that's where we should probably touch on that, and that gets a little tricky, right? So that we should probably be very careful of the way we describe that, but there are ways of issuing payments to yourself through PPP as long as you're not collecting unemployment or other things of that nature, right?
That is entirely correct, and actually we might be able to put a handy guide on the task force website for people to do so. Okay. But for self-employed individuals, such as most oftentimes, if you're self-employed, a lot of these small businesses will file their tax return under what's called a Schedule C. It's actually part of your personal tax return, your 1040, but it reflects your business's income. And for a sole owner, the way that PPP gets calculated is the total amount that you brought in as your income, and basically divided by 12 times 2.5. Now, the only exception to that is if you're earning over $100,000, then it's $100,000 divided by 12 times 2.5, which equals out to $20,830 some dollars. So that's how you would go about calculating the eligibility for what you would apply for, number one. Number two, in terms of documentation or whatnot, since when you apply for forgiveness, you were attesting that the money was used for appropriate matters, it would just be a matter of, in the event of an audit, reconciling out your income and any of those other qualifying expenses. I see we had some other questions here pop in. Just take a quick second.
It's a question about, like, can you add someone to your, it wouldn't necessarily be your business license per se, but it would be literally as a shareholder or an owner. You're asking would it look like the business was just opened? Yeah, kind of. I mean, you got to watch the business structure if you're like selling it. That I think goes beyond our pay grade here today to know. We'd have to know all the details of that. Yeah, that's the question about that. A CPA would want to know that in detail, because I don't think we're equipped to know if it's an LLC or a C Corp, or you're filing on your, sole proprietor on your own tax return. So I don't know that we could necessarily get in
the unfortunate answer to that question is a solid maybe. Yeah. It requires a lot more information to be digested by a professional, as Jim just said.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. But if you'd like to, Tony, if you'd like to text in, to me on that, I could maybe get a little more info about that specific question and then maybe help guide you. But then definitely a CPA would have to answer that, because that's a little too technical for today, I think. I wish we could answer that clearly, and then the other uses, right? So I know Ryan clipped through like rent and utilities and things like that, like the last round was, but now they've expanded it a little bit. So one of the things that we should be aware of and make sure all of us on this call and beyond are aware of, anybody watching on TV or seeing this after the fact, and that's that things like software, right? Or technological upgrades that related to, could theoretically relate to COVID contingencies, right? Like, for example, being able to start selling online, e-commerce sites or software, POS systems, things like that. There's a narrow but kind of, interesting and good opportunity for you to go digital in your business if you haven't already, or for you to expand that presence, right? To adapt. And so those are now this round considered deductible expenses as well in that other bucket of 40%. And again, PPE is, of course, so any kind of barriers or protective gear and equipment and so on. There are, whether or not things like outdoor dining adaptations are, considered part of PPE, we can't really say. I mean, you'd have to, again, consult your accountant on that. But things like software or e-com upgrades and so on appear to be at all, from all the designations appear to be eligible. which again, really important now more than ever, and certainly going to be beneficial not just during the pandemic, but then after, right? Because now you have a strong digital presence. I could touch on, like an example here in town with my wife's store, where she, had a digital presence, but expanded it quickly back in the spring. And so those costs would be, if she expanded it further now, would be, some of those costs would be eligible to be deducted from her PPP if she were to be awarded it. So same thing for you. If you need an e-com site or you need to upgrade yours, that appears as though that should be eligible, and things like that. So we talked about utilities, rent. There are other things like it. And again, there's a list. And as Ryan said, maybe we'll get a little a little cheat sheet to let you know what's eligible. Okay.
Awesome. So thank you both. We've touched on PPP and EIDL. Do we also want to hit today, or is that you think that might be better for a separate day, the NJEDA Small Business Emergency Assistance Loans, Jim, or do you think that might be better for a different day?
Different day, and also maybe not the best for a lot of businesses. And I'm not going to be harsh about that. I think it's a nice opportunity. There may be other opportunities. There are other funds out there. The county's put together, and there will be many, many more released, including one that's town-wide shortly, hopefully, if we get the final approval from the county and the state on it. So there were some that were earmarked to the downtown. There will be at least one or two that are earmarked to the entire town that the mayor and council has put together in coordination with the county and the state. We'll update on that. And maybe that's where we could touch a little bit on the NJEDA, Jonathan, just because I don't know that a ton of businesses are going to be too keen on that, since it's not quite as competitive or easy to achieve as some of these other funds. Just would be my suggestion. And then there's some county funding out there that will be expanded, we think, soon. But right now it's pretty well, it appears as though it's, they have a lot of applicants right now. So we would maybe not be as keen on getting too much into detail on that one today.
Gotcha. Thank you. Thank you. So, at this point, most of the questions that came in from PPP and EIDL, we've answered from help@hammonton.com. Kind of hit a little bit of both of those things. Ryan, I know you had a couple other topics that you wanted to touch on, today before we broke and we moved forward. Is this a good time, you think, to naturally kind of roll into those things?
Here's what I would like to do, because it sounds like we're going to be gearing up for another one of these sessions, which is great. That means there's a lot of things happening that our business owners in the community can benefit from. But if people have something handy to jot a note down on, because we know what time of the year it is. It's we're in early February. A lot of people are planning on doing the annual trip to the CPA or the accountant. And there are some very interesting opportunities available to business owners that I think should be asked about. So with that being said, I'll try to go slow with this, some questions that should be asked. First off, number one, if you did not get a PPP loan initially, should I get a should I apply for PPP now? Number one. Number two, if you applied for a PPP loan and have not applied for forgiveness yet, should I be applying for forgiveness right now? Number three, if I did not get a second PPP loan yet, should I be applying for a second PPP loan yet? And/or am I eligible to apply for a second PPP loan yet? Number four, I know we kind of touched on EIDL a little bit. EIDL, by the way, is an acronym: Economic Injury Disaster Loan. It's a loan program through the SBA for declared disasters. This EIDL program, I know we touched on the expanded opportunity for an advance, but the loan program itself has in fact reopened for loan amounts of up to $2 million. As Jim mentioned before, they were kind of capping those loans at $150,000 back last year. The program has since expanded. It is not forgivable money as we stand here today. It is in fact a loan, but as Jim mentioned, they are very, very favorable loan terms. So it'd be a question: should I be looking at getting an EIDL loan for my business? And then getting a little bit more advanced, there's a couple of other things that I think we're going to be one of the first organizations to touch on as a town. Number one, there is an interesting little section of the tax code called Section 139. 139, just to give everyone a quick backstory, was a tax law that was put into effect after the September 11th tragedy back in 2001. and it allows businesses to make tax-free payments to employees and or owners to assist with various matters during a federally declared disaster, of which COVID is a federally declared disaster. So this could be an option, especially the most common scenario I see this for is if you're a business owner, if you suddenly had to have your staff or your team members work from home and having to set up home offices. This could be an avenue to help out with defraying those costs. So I would inquire about Section 139. The final thing I would be asking about, and we can cover this a little bit more, is there's a newer program out there called the Employee Retention Credit, also known as ERC. I will be the first one to say up front, this is not for the faint of heart. You absolutely need to have a highly qualified CPA reviewing this with you, but there could be an opportunity to have even more payroll picked up beyond what was already picked up under the PPP funds. So this one's not getting a lot of press coverage right now, mostly because it's so complex that people in the accounting industry are struggling to understand it. But at our firm here, we're starting to get a good handle on it and realizing that this could be another interesting avenue for struggling businesses to help get some more money in their hands. So I know we'll probably be touching on that one during a subsequent webinar. But if you happen to be having your annual visit with the accountant before our next webinar, I would include that in your question list as well. And above all else, if the answers you're getting don't make sense, or you're not quite comfortable in their confidence of those answers, I would advise seeking a second opinion from a qualified, from someone who's qualified. And I know us here in town, we're always happy to help out as well. If you wanted to submit any questions via help@hammonton.com.
So I do see, thanks, Ryan. I do see, and again, I know that that's a lot, everything we've given you today in just under an hour, because it's been under an hour that we've actually been on. I know it's almost 4:20, but we were actually only on for just under an hour. But I do see one, and I know it's a lot to digest, but we will be doing some follow-ups. And again, you can always reach out to us at help@hammonton.com and also at 609-925. Help me out, Jonathan.
609-925-1166.
1166. I always want to add a 25 at the end of that. 609-925-1166. So, okay. So I do see that Tony, someone else had texted, messaged in saying, when you say the entire town, is it the zip code or just the town? When I reference unrelated to PPP, but just to other grants that may or may not be coming available, which we are fairly likely they will, but we can't announce them until they're actually functioning and have application processes nailed down and approved by this county and federal state government, I should say. Yes, it would just be within the legal borders of the town of Hammonton, because the town of Hammonton is awarded the grant, and that has been earmarked to go toward business relief grants to businesses in the town of Hammonton. As soon as we are able to announce it, though, you'll be able to know about that. So no, it wouldn't just be the zip code in this case, because it isn't a free-form one. This is within the designated borders and boundaries of the legal limits of the town of Hammonton for the town-wide business relief micro grants. Those, again, that's not out there yet officially, but as soon as it is, trust me, we will be doing webinars and information and media information out there about it as soon as we have information. It's just not available yet, unfortunately. There's a lot of logistics to work out to make sure it works smoothly. Good question, though.
Jim, on that, are there any other grant opportunities that we didn't cover today that you'd like to make sure that we cover before we get to our future webinars? Because we're right around the hour. This is typically around the time where we start to break. I wanted to make sure we covered everything you were looking to cover today as well.
No, for today, the main grants would be PPP. If you didn't do round one, and some businesses in town didn't, I can tell you that for sure, because some we got in at the very last minute after one of the extensions. But there are definitely businesses that are eligible that did not get it last year. They just didn't apply. They were worried it was going to be a loan. They thought it was some sort of trick to get they were going to have to repay it. They have the opportunity to do both, Ryan, right? So just for clarification's sake, they can still go back in their time machine and basically get those funds that they missed. Yeah.
They can absolutely go back in the time machine and get round one for sure. In terms of being able to get round one and round two, It's a tighter window to try to hit, but at a minimum, you should try to go get round one. The
And
eligibility requirements are very, very low to go get round one. Also, interesting to note, by the way, this is one thing I should have mentioned earlier, so my apologies. I know one of the biggest reasons that we have seen for people who did not apply for PPP round one is there might have been some issues, I'll say, with their payroll. Their payroll might have been a little bit light. Their business might have been in operation prior to February of 2020, which is a requirement, but because they were just starting up, their payroll was low and it didn't necessarily make sense. Well, under the new rules, you are able to use your 2020 payroll if, in fact, it is higher, in which case it would make sense. So there are some interesting opportunities that we have seen over the past month where it didn't make sense for them to apply for PPP last year, but because of the change in circumstances, it does make sense now. So I can't emphasize enough what Jim said. If you didn't get the money the first time around, it would be worth taking a look at getting it now.
Yep. So if you didn't apply for round one of PPP, you didn't miss out. You still have an opportunity. Talk to your accountant, talk to your lender. And if they tell you you can't, they're wrong, and get a hold of us. If you haven't, and more than likely you haven't applied for round two yet of PPP, but if you haven't yet, definitely apply for that. Talk to your lender, talk to your accountant, get yourself lined up, get going. And then keep an eye out on the SBA EIDL grants and loans to see if you are eligible for, or to monitor that as they expand that, to see if you're eligible for either of those. Even if you've already received it or received smaller amounts, you may be eligible to go back to the well again there. So that would be the other takeaway. And then the other pieces would be some of the things Ryan touched on, like the tax credits and so on. Definitely start to touch base if you're a little bit medium or larger size business, especially, because some of that will definitely impact you greatly. And be aware of the deductions, right? That this is almost all deductible, pretty much all deductible now, not declared as income, and almost all deductible for any of the expenses related to it, which is all good stuff for your accounting needs. And then the final pieces would be the local. We did do some rounds. I know there are a lot of folks who took advantage of that in a good way. Locally, we were very blessed and worked very hard collectively. The town, Main Street, people on this committee, the Economic Impact Committee, and others to make sure that we were awarded several rounds of grants for the MPP program locally in the downtown. We're seeking more there. We are also, for the rest of the businesses in the rest of the town, putting together in coordination with the mayor, the county, and the state, a town-wide grant program for business owners, micro grant program that we'll be announcing shortly, as long as it gets approved, which again is beyond our control if we get final approval. We did really push hard. And I will give the mayor a lot of credit for that. He pushed really hard to make sure that the barriers for entry were lowered so that it was easier for our smallest and most businesses who are suffering the most are able to take advantage of that throughout the entire community. And then there is a county program, which again, a little too hard for a lot of folks, and a lot of folks are already in line for that one at this point because they opened it up back in December. So that one is available if you'd like to check it out. I believe, I'm not sure that they are still accepting applications, but they may do another round of that as well. And that's available at acia.org or .gov, I think. But it's if you Google Atlantic County Business Grants, I believe that should show up. And it may even also be, I'm fairly certain it is updated on our website if it's available at hammonton.com, and drill down to the business updates, and you should see it there, or reach out to us. I hope that helps. That's the recap of, at the moment. There will be more. And again, there's this $1.9 trillion you keep hearing about is broken up into various different buckets of funds for additional funds. Some of it will be additional funds for businesses. It appears some of it will be additional funds for businesses, possibly. If that's the case, we'll keep you updated on that too.
So thank you. So Ryan and Jim, I want to make sure I just throw it out one last time. Is there anything else you guys want to throw out today for anybody? I know we covered a lot. We really did cover a lot today, even though we did have a late start. But is there anything that you guys want to leave everyone with, before we move on into our next webinar in the next coming weeks?
I'll go first here. Yep, without a shadow of a doubt, there's still a lot happening and a lot of moving pieces. So I can't emphasize enough. If you consult with your accountants, consult with if you happen to be working with a higher level attorney on the opportunities available to you. And don't be afraid to ask questions and seek a second opinion if someone's telling you you're not eligible for something. I can't tell you how many times I've encountered business owners who have been told that they can't do something only to discover that, yes, in fact, they can, and they nearly miss out on an opportunity. So, that is, first and foremost. The second item, a little softer for me, but, as we kind of seen how the effects of the pandemic have worn on, if you're not already, I would definitely, make an effort to support local businesses. We're very fortunate that our business owners in the town of Hammonton have been doing an excellent job trying to, thrive and survive during this pandemic. And, if you, next time you're considering logging on to Amazon and buying something, I would just take a moment to pause and say, is there a local shop owner that you could be frequenting instead of a mega online retailer? So I would just, help keep this town great and, help our business owners thrive and survive during these difficult times.
Yeah, that's great sentiments. I guess the only thing I want to wrap up with would be not directly related to this, but and in some ways very much related. We're all business owners or connected to businesses, and that would be two things. First, governor's executive orders are changing, right? They just changed again, so a little more flexibility for our restaurateurs here in town, and bars, which we're very happy about, to bump those to later hours now, and some of our indoor entertainment venues. So that's good. And the capacity as well. So later hours and the capacity going to 35%, both can't hurt. They could only help, especially in the dead of winter. The other thing would be, so be aware of that. I'm sure all the restaurateurs are aware of it, but sometimes they're not because they're busy trying to just keep the doors open. So spread the word on that they can keep later hours now, and they can expand some of their capabilities indoor. The other thing would be vaccinations. We get a lot of calls at the hotline, at the Coronavirus Task Force hotline. We get a lot of calls, texts, and emails to mayor and council and other people as well. I certainly do as well. And I will tell you, vaccination information, the best thing to do at this point right now, the best source that we've found, in addition to just registering at the state's portal, is also to register at the Atlantic Care one, the Atlantic County, the Atlantic City mega site, which would be vaccinations at, I'm going to give it to you right now. It's no www, it's just vaccination, 2 C's, vaccination.atlanticcare.org. If somebody could type that in the chat, I'd appreciate it. Vaccination.atlanticcare.org. And that's ATLANTICARE. There's only 1 C in the middle there. It's Atlantic Care. Vaccination.atlanticcare.org. Set up, register you, your family, whoever's eligible. Get everybody registered, because even if you don't want to get the vaccine now, you'll be ready and registered for the future. Right now, the mega site seems to be we have gone through it with folks. We've helped their wheelchairs there. They make it help co-managed by Atlanticare and also by I believe Southern Jersey Family Medical Center will be joining in on that force, or maybe one of the other hospitals at some point, but definitely Atlanticare at this point, and also the National Guard. So it's very, very well organized, and it absolutely is worth registering. You're not going to get an appointment right away, but you might. So it's a lottery system, basically. You have to be very much in tune with it. So I say that because as business owners, I know this is a business call and a business webinar, but for business owners, the more people we can get vaccinated that want to get vaccinated, and the more of our staff and our families and so on that are eligible, the higher the likelihood we can get back to some sense of normalcy. Even if we have to do booster shots every few months, at least we're back to something that feels or looks like back to business again. All right, so just keep that in mind if you're up for it. And if you have any questions on that same deal, 609-925-1166 or help@hammonton.com. Even if residents, employees, grandparents, parents, whoever it would be, spread the word and get that word out there. We're happy to help in that regard too.
Jim, proud you got the phone number right on the last time. So
it was in the chat screen, so I was able to remember it. Yeah. I don't call it. I answer calls sometimes, but I don't call it. Yeah.
So I did post the link to the vaccination website through Atlanticare in the chat. We'll also, just for everyone, at Hammonton.com. If you do go to Hammonton.com and you go to our new and upcoming hot topics, you'll see the state of New Jersey's vaccination information portal. And in there, it has a link to all of the locations where you could seek a coronavirus vaccine. But as Jim had mentioned, this is the location that we've seen seems to be working the best. And it's right here in our backyard in Atlantic County. But as we wrap, Ryan, Jim, Copelia, I want to thank you guys for volunteering your time again for us, here on this call, but also for our entire community who I know is going to watch the webinar, after the fact, and for also volunteering your time to answer questions outside of just this webinar. So thank you very much for everything you're doing for us and you're doing for the business community and the town as a whole. Again, I apologize to everyone for the late start, but I appreciate everyone hanging tough and hanging with us. One thing I would like to just leave everybody with, along this process, don't ever be afraid to ask questions. Encourage everyone to ask questions. Don't just assume that you either can't, or that it's too hard to do, or that you won't be able to figure out how to navigate something. There's someone who is here to help you. If it's one of the people on this call, if it's one of the people on this call who can at least get you to that person, don't be afraid to ask. There's no dumb questions. We're all trying to figure this out for the very first time, and hopefully the last time. So, again, don't be ashamed to ask anything at any time. That's what we're here for. So again, you guys have our support, and we really appreciate everybody calling in today. This webinar will be made available either later this evening or tomorrow at hammonton.com. If you have any further questions, like Jim said, 609-925-1166, or email help@hammonton.com. We'll make sure we get them out to you. So I'd also like to thank Ms. Denise Mazzio for setting this up, coordinating this, facilitating this. Even when we got back on, working it all through. Denise, you are the best. You always are. So thank you very much for everything that you have done and continue to do for us. We appreciate it. So everyone, please stay healthy, stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks with our next webinar. So thank you all very much.
Thanks, everyone. Good luck.
Thank you all.
Take care, guys.